minutes.
Okay, so everybody's got those two. I think the people that grabbed it, they got a handout for that. Where my handout went, right here somewhere. Okay, with that, let's assume the agenda got approved. Thanks, Joyce and Keith.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We have some minutes from the meeting of March 19th.
I wasn't there, but they look fine for minutes. I move the adoption.
Second, blah, 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 blah. I will, when Reg gets here later on, just ask him to follow up on the garbage deal. But other than
I
that,
was gonna speak to that.
you're gonna speak to that?
It's in the action items at the end when we get to that.
Okay, fair enough.
5.1.
Okay, so I'm
review
assuming
action
again,
item.
which staff, we lost the corporate secretary, but we'll assume the minutes have been approved then.
Yeah.
Okay, next on the agenda
Public
here.
comments, there's nobody, so we're caught up a whole 5 minutes.
There you go, we're moving on. So draft transportation plan here.
That's Emma.
Okay, Emma, what do you want to tell us here?
I'm just gonna
We are financial types, macro types.
Okay, great.
And we're gonna wanna talk about dollars.
I'm going to talk about the numbers. Okay, so I'm going to give a really quick overview of the project and the plan, and hopefully leave lots of time for discussion around numbers. So I've prepared a little presentation. Can I start stuff?
Yes.
All right. Do I need to get somebody?
No, she's not gonna rush.
Okay. So about 2 years ago, the municipality directed staff to embark on this project to create a transportation plan to improve transportation for the island. It is to cover 20 years and guide policies, development, and public investment, with key objectives involving active transportation, transit service, regional connections, parking and safety improvements, more alternative options, parking management, and integration of all these different ways of travel. So this project took place over 5 phases. We reviewed past studies, collected data, engaged stakeholders, researched alternatives, and prepared the final plan. And throughout the whole project, there was a real emphasis on public engagement. By the end of the project, over 1,000 people have been involved, providing a wealth of knowledge and potential ideas for solutions. And this, along with policy direction from the official community plan, was used to craft the community vision for Bowen Island transportation. And this lovely infographic here was generously donated by BC Healthy Communities in support of this project. As you can see here, there's a real, I feel like a reflection of the Bowen Island culture, connecting with nature and being able to get around with the option of not using the car, being innovative while acknowledging we are an island and we are dependent upon our water connections to the greater region. And that makes it all that much more important that the different transportation services are well coordinated and integrated. I think this is well summed up in the vision statement, which is simple, seamless, sustainable transportation options for every Bowen Islander. So to help us reach this community vision from what we currently have on the ground, the plan uses 3 main strategies to develop better connections, more transportation choices, to improve the health of the people and the environment. Through these strategies, the plan has 30 plan elements to be implemented over 20 years. Priority projects include a cross-island multi-use path, that's for both pedestrians, cyclists, and even equestrians. Safety improvements to the Cardina intersection, ongoing efforts to coordinate transportation schedules, both on island and off island. The total plan budget is estimated at about $3.3 million, and roughly half of that will come from potential funding. So I just did a little math, and that would equal up to roughly $85,000 per year. So that sums up the project and the plan that came out of it. In terms of the process, we are currently going through the referrals, which actually today is the last committee referral, and the plan has also been put into our branded template and sent out for external referrals, scheduled to go back to council on May 14th for final approval, and official implementation to start immediately after. I say official implementation because as this plan has been developing over the 2 years or so, a lot of these elements have already been put into action And we do need that official approval from council in order to proceed, especially where funding is involved. A lot of the eligibility requires that council approves the plan. So a little bit of urgency in that. And that wraps up the presentation. I just put out a few key questions for the committee in terms of any concerns or priorities for financial implications, and if there are any other opportunities for funding that hasn't been identified in the plan that you would like included. And also, of course, any questions or general comments on the plan.
You don't have the funding tables on the PowerPoint.
Not on the PowerPoint, no. I think they're in the package.
But they're in the package, but it's just easier
They're in
to.
the package.
Mr. Chair, could I just say, I really think this is one of the best reports we've had come through council. So Emma, for your work, I'd like to say thank you. It's clear, and it's just nice to see something start and finish, you know, get to a point where we might be able to implement something. So, and I also really like the fact that the coordination with external bodies is really pinpointed, that we are looking out beyond ourselves. And that, to me, is really important. Whether I love all the details, that's a completely different thing, but thank you for the report.
I would share the comment of Joyce's. I thought it was a very detailed report. I really only had two comments. One was I would hope that any resolutions that's going through council is subject to getting the outside funding of some type or greater certainty. I appreciate you don't know you got it till the check's in the mail sort of thing. I totally understand that. But if we can't get the outside funding, that kind of changes the dynamics of the plan a little bit. And the other thing I would suggest, you absolutely need a long-term plan. You know, if you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. But I'd probably concentrate on maybe it's the first 3 years or something like that, because then you're more in an action mode as opposed to, not being disrespectful, a theory mode, if I can put it that way. This is what we've got to do. And again, that being pended, I worked it out, even with the outside grants, it's still $500 per household in the first 3. I turned that off, I'm sorry. It's still $500 per household, along with the other expenses we're putting on the household. So it's very relevant to get the outside grants, and that's net, if assuming we get the outside grants. You can say it's only $500 over 3 years, but we got a lot of stuff that's going for $1,000 here and $200 there, and pretty soon it adds up. But I agree, it's a good report.
And just a quick response, I believe that on a yearly basis, the transportation plan will have to put forward a detailed work plan for council approval.
So there'd be a detailed work plan would go to council, and based upon that detailed work plan for this year or whatever year it is, and
it will,
and subject to getting this grant money, which the grant application just went in, we're going.
yeah.
Got
So for example, beginning of 2018, well, we don't have one for this year because the plan's not adopted, but if we had the plan in place, we could put forward this detailed work plan beginning of 2018 if council approves, in theory, with all the budgeted amounts, capital budgets. We could take that approved work plan to apply for funding. If the funding is approved in 2018 for 2019, then council will have that knowledge that the funding is confirmed to approve the capital budget for 2019. Does that follow?
And if I could just add to that, we'd have an internal control in place. So when, obviously, we do the financial plan ahead of when external funding is confirmed. I, in finance, would not approve that project to go ahead until that external funding had been realized. So we'd be checking to make sure that the external funding is available and will be realized, or has been approved before the project has any go.
Just to show my lack of knowledge, guilty as charged, all those trails in Worcester, which I think they've got a great trail system there, Did they get outside funding for that, do you know offhand?
Actually,
The province?
think I can answer that one.
Yeah.
Oh, you
First, firstly, apologies, I had this down for 11:45, so.
You really
my-
would have been late.
My apologies. No, that's when it's down.
All right, other people had the same program, so go ahead.
Yeah, they did. They had provincial and federal assistance as part of that Whistler program,
So-
going back to 1982 when it was in deep trouble, and from 82 to 92 it did certainly get some external assistance.
So there's some precedence here.
Yeah.
And they did it in my understanding from remembering what was back there, you would remember, it was gravel first and then got paved in pieces, so it wasn't the full meal deal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the Olympics then, of course, was a spur onto the.
and they got that extra.
Man,
I do have a comment about it. I think I'll just give the one that is concerning me the most. I note the suggestion that any new development, there would need to be a plan in place regarding transportation and the impact of that development. To me, that has financial implications because we have not a great reputation for dealing with applications promptly. So my caution on it would be, I understand it, probably makes sense to do, but it would seem to me important to also do it so that there's a streamlined effort, that it's not a way of stalling development if the development should be going forward. So that one really raised a red flag for me.
Joyce, I'm probably the last one to comment on that, but I think we have to keep in mind, there's a very interesting article in the Globe this week, if you saw it, the amount of municipal costs in which the housing buyer in Toronto has to absorb. And according to the article, it's $124,000 per housing unit. And at the same time, everybody knows there's a pricing housing problem. And Keith, you may be closer than I am. I couldn't believe this number, but somebody that sort of knows what they're talking about says that almost 1/3 of the city of Vancouver's revenue comes from additional costs put on the new home buyer. And so, again, if we're adding these costs, we got a difficult situation already on the island from a cost point of view, so I just would echo that. And I'm the last one that should be talking on that subject.
Well, the other thing I wanted to add about the road study is, I think you need to define development, because somebody is doing 1 or 2 lot subdivision. I mean, and I don't know that there's any really big areas left,
Yeah.
because Cape Roger Curtis is done and Grafton Road is done,
Yeah.
so.
So this has come up for discussion in the working group. This comes out of the draft subdivision and development servicing bylaw that's also currently under adoption process. And under the transportation portion of this bylaw, which governs development standards, including roads, sewer, water, all those services, the requirement for a traffic impact analysis is only for significant development. Allison, you're correct in that what is significant isn't defined in that bylaw.
Well, you don't use the word significant in the plan, you just talk about any development.
Yeah, and actually when you made that comment, I made a note for myself to double check the wording on that. It is only meant for significant development. We're not going to be asking this of a single family house, definitely not. We're talking about things like Grafton Lakes, or even the community center that would generate a significant amount of traffic from the norm. And it's left to the discretion of the approving officer at subdivision and the superintendent of public works with their more intimate knowledge of roads and local traffic. But it's not meant for every single development, definitely not.
What does council need from this group around this table regarding the subject?
Well, I guess
What do they want us to
it's
say?
these 3 pages, I would think. And where's this 1.577 million? Or I did a quick number, and if the capital total is 3 million and annual operating is 266, that's a total of 3.3 million. 1.6 is coming from grants. So where's the other 1.7 going to come from? and it's very much front-end loaded. I mean, just in year
Exactly,
28,
500,000.
I got the same conclusion.
2018, it's $320,000 if we had, and we haven't put any of this in the budget.
I made it,
So $320,000. And I asked Raj to bring a printout of the unappropriated, we've squirreled away in the
Yeah.
financial statements, there's a line called unappropriated surplus
It's just our surplus.
of $4 million. But of that $4 million, we haven't got the water and sewer funds on here, like the money that's squirreled away, and I'm assuming that's in that 4 million. So you take out 1.8 million out of that, and you take away $1 million of what we squirreled away. We don't have $1.5 million, you know, a 300,000 a year for the next 3 years worth of surplus to
I was on the same
contribute to this.
wavelength. I made the first 3-year net cost $789,000
Yeah,
for the first 3 years. That's how I got the
Yeah.
$500 per
yeah.
parcel, give or take some rounding there.
So where's that money gonna come from?
So just in response, the transportation plan was never meant to come out of the reserve funds. It's meant to come out of the actual capital and operating budgets. So that
But to
gets
fund this
approved.
capital and operating budgets,
Yes, that gets.
we've got to
approved every
increase
year.
taxes by $300,000.
It
And that's a
depends-
10% increase. or
It just
8%
depends
So
increase.
on what
if,
council
yeah,
deems
if I
priority.
can support in that, we do collect $1.2 to $1.4 million a year for capital purposes.
Right.
This is for capital. And then we do have discretion on how that 1.3 is allocated to various reserves. So if it becomes a priority of council and the municipality that we need to be putting money into transportation, I mean, that essentially, that is where the municipality's contribution would come from, is the $1.2, $1.3 million that
And
we
that's that
currently,
1.5%.
and it goes up. That's not just the 1.5%. What we do is we increase that by 1.5% on an annual basis, and we put that into the, which
It's the
reserve, the
statutory.
capital replacement and renewal reserve.
Yeah, but that's
So
replacement and renewal.
That's for replacement and renewal, that's just the 1.5%, but we still do, it's only the increase that needs to go into that reserve. But overall, like, we don't have to put the entire amount that is dedicated for capital replacement into that reserve. That goes to our various reserves based on what our needs are going to be for the year. Because otherwise, we would be very shortly run out of reserve funds. So for example, if equipment and road replacement required $500,000 of 1.2 million in a year, I would put $500,000 into that reserve and then take it out of that reserve.
Yeah,
So we can
but Emma's plan
reallocate the
is for new
purposes for
stuff.
which the total amount of capital that we collect goes into, so.
So should we have some kind of supplemental report on how we would allocate those funds over the next 3 years? It just seems to me, my naivety, that we've got a lot of capital projects going on, and they're all trying to feed at the same fund trough, or whatever I should say. Emma's busting to tell us something.
Well, I agree with Allison. There's been nothing in current reserve funds for this plan because this plan has not been adopted. We need to adopt this in order to move forward and plan accordingly for those funds to go into the appropriate places.
But
But we
just-
can't
sorry,
do that until the plan
sure.
is adopted.
I'm just thinking, maybe though, the approval should be, again, conditional upon securing outside funding, and also reviewing internal funding too. I mean, in principle, it's great. It's like you got a family meeting and everybody agrees we should go on a little vacation there. Well, that's great, but it's subject to us finding the dough on my Visa card type of thing. You know, it's almost the same principle. And so I could see council potentially approving the plan. It's a great plan. It's all motherhood and apple pie, excuse my language there, but you get the idea. But you gotta be paid for it, so there should be, I would think, a couple of conditions on it. One, the outside grants, there's a higher certainty we're gonna get them, the check's sort of in the mail. And B,
Subject to
who else is
availability
coming,
of
what
internal
other
funding.
projects are coming to the trough?
Yeah.
I get, oh, sorry.
And I'm just going to reiterate what has said earlier, the funding applications can't go through unless we have the plan adopted. But in terms of the actual budget approval, that's a yearly thing. So you can, or council can decide on a yearly basis based on whether or not those funding applications have been approved.
But I would, maybe I'm above my pay grade here a little bit, but it seems to me if you're applying for a grant, it's not unreasonable to have a resolution from council that says they approved the project.
Subject to getting the.
Well, we gotta get a
Subject to-
grant. I mean, even in the grant
Yeah.
application, if somebody calls you up and said, did council approve it? Yes, subject to getting the grant. I would think that's not an unreasonable condition to put on it, you know?
So what you could probably do is, when you're talking, you could approve the transportation plan subject to individual projects being reviewed as part of the annual budget process.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I am as well, but just to go back to that niggly little point, I'm with you there 100%. Subject to be an annual process, but does that then write in to what you've just said, that the attendant grants have been acquired as well? Because the trouble is so often councils wouldn't work like this in business, where we approve something in principle, right, and subject to, but people very quickly forget the subject to. What they hear is approved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's another silo, because there's an art silo as well, and there's also a road silo, and there's all these little silos that stand up just like this drinking mug here. But when it comes to connecting the dots is where I get nervous, and I really like the idea of the, but I'm really concerned that people just hear that word approved, and no, wait a second. It's not just approved, it's approved subject to what you just said. How can we tie in meaningfully the fact that it ain't going anywhere unless that other vital element's achieved?
I would think, Michael, again, speaking my own view, that if Raj puts together some kind of summary, maybe it's a 3-year thing or whatever time period, shorter term, that says this is the amount of money that council's got to allocate for this type of thing, and here's a list of things that we may have to why we may have to draw upon this allocation. And so that's before council and anybody seeing it. This is one reason it's not a blanket chip, because we're not only got to prove it in principle, we got to find the dough all out of this pot.
I think what we would do in getting to your allocation question, we do 5-year capital plan. So the allocation of our reserves would be based on that 5-year financial plan, but we do have to do forward projections of our reserves to take that into consideration. So in due time, we will have the projection for our reserves for future years. We don't have that currently. So we'll get that into play.
Joyce,
And then to answer, I was just going to answer Michael's question earlier. I think I had mentioned it earlier as well, but in terms of grant applications, as part of the annual budget process, when transportation brings forward their projects, they will indicate that they are grant funded or not. And so on an annual basis, council will ask, is this grant funded or not? They may not want to proceed at that point if it's not grant funded, and if they do say they're grant funded, then the process will fall upon finance after that to ensure it would be irresponsible of finance to give the go-ahead for a project until we knew that the grant funding was in place.
Joyce, you got a comment?
Just as a former government grantor, governments often don't just look for whether something's been approved, but whether there's money there to
Yeah.
back up the approval. So, just getting the approval isn't going to sing a lot for big money from major government sources. So really, the allocation has to happen as well in order for the grant application to have any weight at all. So I think we have to be really careful that we understand that. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I know this may sound mean-spirited to council, But I think the hesitation that's being expressed around the table is that we know that there are a lot of capital projects coming forward. Which ones are the most important? As Finance Committee, we haven't heard that yet. And I really think that that's part of the problem. It's not whether this is good work or not. It's just, holy mackerel, how much can we afford? That's my feeling.
Those relevant points. And then Allison.
Just two points I wanted to bring up. The whole purpose of this project in developing a plan was to show what the community priorities for transportation investment were. And that's what this plan has done. That is information provided to inform council decisions on their budgetary spending. How it's decided on a year-to-year basis is, I mean, I'm sure there's other factors that need to be considered, but this is all the plan does, and it is meeting its terms of reference. The second point that I wanted to bring up is the way this plan is structured is based a lot on how other municipalities do their transportation planning. There is, as Raj mentioned, a 5-year capital plan that projects spending out 5 years, and based on approval of that, we can take that to apply for funding. I'm not saying that council has approved the budget and has already given the money for the project, but they've committed that amount for the project, and that is enough for most funding applications. After the funding has been approved or not approved, with that knowledge, council can then make their decision on approving the budget.
I think the 2 points you raised there, and was one, this is a great plan. I think a lot of the discussion here is how's it fit in a priority? So you're sitting around the dinner table with the family, everybody thinks we should go on a great vacation. Is that more important than a new car or the new TV set? It's not that we shouldn't go on vacation, but how do those 3 priorities stack up in terms of funding allocation, or whatever you want to call it? So I don't think any of the comments here are critical of the plan. In fact, I think the comments have been positive about the plan. It's just whether you want the car or the TV set, if I can put it that way. Allison, you had a comment.
So I totally agree with everything Joyce was saying, and I guess when we set up the capital replacement and reserve fund, and again, it's replacement and renewal, we did that because we had no money squirreled away if we had a major disaster like a big rock slide, or we had to totally replace the library building, or and what the right amount is to have in that fund was going to be predicated on what the asset management plan showed us. So at this point, I'm not comfortable saying that any of the contributions that are going into that capital and replacement fund that's built up $2 million could be redirected to go towards $1 million towards the Cross Island Trail, or 250,000, to Cardina. So I guess without seeing that asset management plan, I don't know whether we've got enough money squirreled away now or not. And the roads reserve fund, said, okay, on average, we spend 500,000 a year, so that one year we'd spend 100, the next year we'd spend 700, so everybody's tax bill wasn't going like this. We said we'll put 500 in a pot and then spend out of that pot. So I just don't know where, if we had put, and I'll just, 300, this whole of 2018 column in the 2018 budget, then it seems to me we would have raised taxes to raise $320,000, and that's an 8% increase in taxes.
Yeah.
If I'm doing my math right.
I don't mean, I'm not trying to add to the humor around me.
Yeah.
I worked it out to be $500 per parcel. I'm up by about 10 or 20 bucks.
Yeah.
$500 per parcel over 3 years. Why don't we direct bill everybody?
So I guess the question is.
I just drove Raj nuts there, but that's all right.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Allison, but of the 1.4 million, 472, let's just round it to 500,000, goes towards capital replacement and renewal, and that should not be used for anything other than capital replacement and renewal. I'm in total agreement with that. So that leaves you with another $1 million that you're reallocating on an annual basis to the other priorities. Just as exploring alternatives,
When you say 1.4 million, are you meaning the transfer number?
The total number of the revenues and transfers is 1,315,000.
Yeah.
Plus a few of the items in the non-statutory
Yeah.
reserves, so I just rounded it to about 1.4
Yeah.
million is what we put towards capital.
Yeah.
Of that 1.4, 472 is dedicated to renewal and replacement. The 1.5% policy increase that we have on an annual basis increases that number on an annual basis, so that's not available, that's out of the cards. The remaining 1 million would basically be reallocated based on requests for capital and stuff in the upcoming year so that the reserves are adequate to fund the projects. And building on that, I mean, perhaps if it becomes a priority to proceed with transportation plan initiatives, we already have about $500,000 a year going into roads maintenance and renewal. Maybe we're changing that allocation or that mix, and coordinating with this transportation plan if it's a priority for funding. But there's choices that will have to be made by council, definitely. It just makes the whole gamut of choices
I think this is where we need some
tougher.
ingenuity in finance, so I don't wanna rain on the good parade going by there.
Yeah.
But I think we're robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit, which I
Well,
totally
yeah.
understand.
So I guess before we sort of say, yeah, we like the plan, but I think the caution of where's the money gonna come from for our share, we need to see something like that capital schedule that I can't find the budget documents on the website. That was done, but you had a capital plan that listed out over the 5 years where everything
Yeah.
was gonna come from.
Yeah.
So I think we need to see a hypothetical as to how this would fit into that. And because the 500,000 has to be spent every year, because that's what's being spent on roads renewal.
I'm with
And
Allison.
we can take you for a drive around and you'll know.
I can show you the potholes. Emma, you were about
Yeah.
to say something there.
But I just want to add it to the 5.
Sorry.
Every year, they try, when they're doing a stretch of road, to widen it and get a little bit more shoulder and stuff like that, but.
And the culverts as well. and all that
And
stuff.
the culverts, when they do the culverts and stuff, but it's, part of the problem too is which is another question, did you factor acquiring,
Right away.
right away
No, definitely not.
in here?
This is using existing right of way, this plan.
Whoa.
So
No
we
land
don't,
acquisition.
we don't own the land that the road runs through down by the Mitzes and stuff like that, yeah.
Essentially Grafton, and
Yeah.
that is part of the rezoning when we get that right of way dedication.
But there's,
Do we get eminent domain,
there's another strip
For
off
a-
by
for
the
a
building
trail?
center.
or do we have to negotiate a buy?
For,
Can we get, like a utility can eminent domain to acquire a right of way?
yeah,
And then you just get an appraisal and you pay the
Yeah.
homeowner off, and if they object, that's their problem.
it's a last resort to resort to expropriation.
So this could be dramatically
This plan does not
costed.
plan.
Do you have any idea what a running foot would cost around here?
No. Anyways, what I wanted to say, and again, there is no expropriation needed for this plan. And I just wanted to point out, 2018, this plan hasn't been adopted yet, but I did mention a lot of these elements are already in play because a lot of these improvements have been community priorities one way or another. So a lot of these costs are already accounted for in our public works budget, in our parks budget. The Cardina improvements, those have already been approved to go ahead. They're in
We
the
only
5-year
approved
financial.
$50,000.
Yes, but they're in the 5-year financial
Are
moving
they?
forward for all of the improvements. The 1 year has been approved, but it's already included moving forward to do all of the safety improvements. And that's going to be similar for a lot of these other elements if this plan is approved. We're not talking about a lot of brand new expenditures. We're talking about existing road maintenance and rehabilitation that just includes more active transportation aspects that the community wants. We want safer walking environments, better places for the kids to cycle, more alternative options for people to get around. And they're already, like I said, in play. A lot of the bike barn down by the dock that is already being undertaken by the Snow Cove Improvement Working Group and budgeted for under the Parks budget.
I guess so, Emma, if I combine your comments there with Allison's comments, all that's telling me is that we don't know much about the financial impact of this net to the taxpayer, is what it amounts to.
Yeah, because it almost needs another column. If I'm looking at these numbers, Emma, what you've just said, well, I almost need another column which takes either capital or operating and reduces accordingly, because you're quite right. Something is, in the normal, as the wheels turn, this is happening and this is happening. Well, if that's already budgeted for and happening, that then needs to be taken out of this from a dollar point of view, or highlighted in the fact that this figure could be reduced by everything you're talking about.
But it still costs that much.
Joyce?
I'm wondering if maybe, just based on what you've said, whether what this document in part is, not in whole, but in part is establishing some principles for work taking place by other departments. So the value is on transportation, and the goal is to achieve this, and that this document is used by other departments in planning their strategy. So no longer can roads just pay attention to the road for the cars, but the expectation is, I feel a lot better about supporting the plan if this is sort of a value document that guides the work of others in the municipality at this point. Anyway.
And that's my understanding of this document. It would be guiding the work. It would not be a document that is approving anything, any financial impact on the community per se. It's more about council managing priorities, and the funding should come from within the capital funding envelope, because there's been some discussion about the end result on the taxpayer. So what we do in capital projects should not impact taxpayers the way I plan on doing the budget going forward. It's whether we change that 1.5%. We haven't done a study on our basically sustainable and renew, what's required to sustain and renew our assets, which we will be doing. The asset management plan, we don't have those together. When we do get that information together, that's when we will really understand what we require in this community to fund capital. And then, but right now we are being responsible and putting 1.5% aside, which is what many other communities have done. For example, the district of North Vancouver has been putting 1%, applying a 1% tax increase for the past 10 or 15 years. Those communities that didn't do that, West Vancouver, for example, their taxes went up by an additional 5% 2 years ago, and an additional 3% or so the year before. So they just for capital, and then they have the operating increases. And so we are doing the responsible thing in terms of putting 1.5% in that fund, and we'll get a better idea of what we need once we get our asset management plans together.
Connect some dots here, or unconnect the dots, depending on your opinion, is, first of all, the asset management plan is not going to be ready for some time in the future. I don't know if that's 1 year, 2 years, or whatever the latest is on that, but it's not going to be ready in the next 30 days, for sure. And given that the people that worked on this plan would like to have some comment from council probably in the near term, if that's a worthwhile discussion, and given at least there seems to be a little bit of fog around the room, at least sitting on this chair and a couple other chairs, in terms of how we would reallocate our capital resources in the near term, I don't know, is there pressure to get this thing to council like in the next couple of weeks, or should we maybe wait a month and get another capital summary of where other things are in the near term and then bring it to council? I'm kind of looking at the council people here. It's
The resolution's in here. We received the draft plan, it's out for comment,
yeah.
and then I think the plan was to have it come back for,
Was there a date specified? I don't know.
no, but I think And none of the, I was surprised, I didn't think we had budgeted for any of the transportation plan in this year's budget. So to put this into the financial plan, we'd have to do a financial plan amendment, correct?
There are some initiatives, as Emma had mentioned, are included in there, others aren't. I mean, I don't know what the list of exact
And
projects
I
are in
could
here.
find the budget on our,
Two-thirds of the elements for 2018 have already been approved budget-wise.
okay, and I totally missed that in the budget process. And I can't find the budget on the website, which is driving me up the wall. So,
It seems to me that we're being asked to
But we
support
haven't-
something that we
yeah.
don't know where the money's gonna come from.
yeah,
I
that's,
mean, if that's a good enough resolution for council to say, we're approving it, but we got no idea where the money's coming from, but it's motherhood and apple pie.
Yeah.
so so what you're saying, Emma, is the 250,000 for A9 and the 150,000 for A10 are already in the 2018 budget?
I believe a portion of those projects is approved for 2018, the remainder is in the 5-year financial plan.
Okay, so what's in the financial plan doesn't jive with what's on this plan, right here,
In,
this.
not the entire transportation plan,
No,
and
but
that,
you've got 250,000 and 150,000 in 2018, and I can't find the budget. So
when
Raj's capital budget, where did that money come from?
when this plan was drafted, so these elements and the budgeting was drafted beginning of this year. The plan was to have all the safety improvements done this year.
Okay,
My
so,
understanding is there wasn't enough money in the budget to have it all done this year, so it got deferred to the next year.
okay, now in the budget means as Bob was taking it out of his 500,000 roads budget, or how much of the 250 and the 150 is in the budget, and where's it coming
I
out
believe
of?
there is a $50,000 provision in the 2018 budget for the Cardina pedestrian safety.
Yeah, exactly.
And those are all listed, actually, it is, our website has changed around a little bit, so it is there, because I went and I looked it up yesterday. And just in terms of, so there is a 5-year capital plan there. The 5-year capital plan was not done, like the outer years were not done in detail. For the outer years, simply because we didn't have the time this year, we carried forward the proportions of capital spending that we have in 2018 to 19, 20, 21, and 22. So I did not get a listing from staff of, this is what I plan to do in 2019, 2020, 22. That changes anyways. It's more of a guidance document. So next year when we do the financial plan, I mean, my priority would be to get a list of projects for the respective years in terms of what projects to include. So for example, if we had 50, roughly in a program, if we had, in the transportation program, we had about $500,000, unless I knew of something that was happening that was big in a future year, I would have carried that amount forward. So the only two things that I knew that were really big and that were happening for sure is the community center, the water treatment plant. So the capital costs for those two projects were spread out in the outer years based on what we were going to be spending.
I just think I just heard that there's 500,000 in the roads budget, of which when the budget's prepared, there was mentally 50,000 of that set aside
No,
for these items.
no, there's about $495, close to $500,000 that's spent on an annual basis on road maintenance. And so that's pretty consistent from year to year to year.
But was there a mental allocation of 50 of
So that
to
there
these
would have been a
projects?
mental
What are the
allocation
numbers?
of
9
50
and
going,
10?
pardon? To the outer years?
No,
Just this year,
this year.
yeah.
I'm just trying to marry
Okay.
up what I thought I heard, that there's 50,000 set aside for some safety improvements,
That's right.
which is contained in this document here. And that 50,000, I'll call it mentally set aside within the 490 or 500,000 roads.
Okay, that 50,000 would, so you'd have, let's say you had the 400, let's say you had 500 for the road transportation program. You had 50,000 for the Cardina project.
In addition to the
In
500.
addition to the 500.
Okay, got it.
So that 550 would mentally be set
So
aside
to
in
the degree
future
that in
years.
year one, we want to spend any more of this whatever that number is, 9 and 10,
Yeah,
it's gotta eat into the 500,000 roads budget.
either it has to eat into the 500,000, or we have to do a financial plan amendment, if council approves, for council approval.
So I'm trying to relate the 50,000 versus 2/3 of the 505 being accounted for. Where's the other 300 and whatever the math is?
Well, it sounds like it isn't.
Let me articulate that. I think I heard that 2/3 of this 505 was in the budget or underway.
I don't
And then I
know
heard
if
there's
it's the
only
number.
50,000.
I'm just saying 2/3 of the elements
Yeah.
that were scheduled to be implemented in 2018 have budget approved for it. The actual amount might be different from the estimated amount on this schedule.
When you say 2/3 of the element, 2/3 by dollars
No,
or by projects?
by projects.
And what would be the dollar amount of those?
So like say the Cardina improvements are actually two different elements. There's one for transit improvements and one for pedestrian improvements. They were estimated to be a total of 400,000, right, for 2018? Only 50.
And how much of that is in the budget?
50.
50. So the
Yeah, so-
remainder is in that 5-year capital going out to be
Yeah,
spent.
so I'm saying is,
Which isn't in the plan.
everything above the 50,000 has not been budgeted for.
Correct.
Not approved.
No.
Yeah. Which means, yeah, so if you want to do that program, we got to find $450,000 somewhere.
Yeah.
I got
Listening to this conversation going round,
I heard
and,
that.
and I think Raj really fingered something just a minute or two ago, when obviously, with everything that you've had to do since you've arrived, and the complexity of this, of what is, what isn't, what's this, and where it's allocated, as just one vote on council, I would say there is no urgency to approve this until everyone's had a time to really chase these numbers quietly to ground. And it's an excellent plan, right? Okay, and I know I'm sounding a bit draconian, but in order to support this, we really have to be able to tie up. There can't be loose ends when it comes to dollars. And I think you need more time and we need more discussion on this so we know where everything is. I'm very sorry that we don't have the asset management plan in place, and that's what, 9 months, a year out?
That's probably at least a year.
At least a year.
Yeah.
I understand that, having done asset management plans, unless we call in outside people to do it.
Well, I think we are going to.
Well, even so, then
Yeah.
it shouldn't. A year would be enough. But I really would be uncomfortable, especially listening to this conversation. I'd like to be able to really take away all the question marks. What is, what isn't, and then we can move ahead with greater security. I don't think there is a rush, quite frankly, for us necessary to approve this plan.
Joyce?
So I would recommend this, that this captures the transportation initiatives required for the island, desired for the island, that it be introduced as a principal document for the purposes of being used by all departments in the municipality going forward, and that for the pieces that can't be implemented because they're outside of departmental control, until we are sure about priorities and where money's going to come from, that they not be implemented. That's where I would go with this.
And I'm not sure who's on the committee that designed this. Is there some people in there that are discussing where it's going to come out of the budget, in fairness to the people doing this?
Who was
I
that?
mean, who on that committee is, who's your financial gurus on the committee?
I wouldn't say they're transportation gurus. David Hawking, Richard Smith, Melanie Mason, Elizabeth A. Turner.
And in fairness, I don't think at the time,
Who was the other one?
when this was being done, this was before Raj's arrival,
Yeah.
I don't think they could have possibly accessed those resources. I think they were focused on the community
Yeah.
needs, and thus came up with this principal document. In truth, I hold them innocent. I don't think they would have anyone to refer to in detail to answer the questions you're talking
Well,
about.
that's what I was getting at. It seems to me there's some people designing what's right for the island, and it's kind of divorced from the and I'm not trying to be derogatory, the budget reality, if I can put it that way.
Well,
Lots
I
of needs in a
repeat,
way.
we're meeting the terms of reference to identify transportation priorities. In terms of, I believe they are very realistic capital projects that are presented in the plan. And as Raj has mentioned, we do have capital revenue that could support these initiatives. It's whether or not they're a priority for council, where they want to allocate that money. It's not that we don't have enough, it's just what is a priority for that money. That's what the plan does. It's not a financial document. It's not going to dictate how we spend the money, but it's to inform council decisions.
I go back to Joyce's comment that, she may have to rephrase it, that sounded like some kind of motion that I heard or something,
Yeah,
or.
it was some kind of emotion.
Okay, so
That's, Steph, you got something that
Yeah,
sounds
well-
legalese over there?
the Financial Advisory Committee, I think, supports the transportation plan
In principle,
as.
in principle,
Okay.
or something like that, or whatever.
In principle as a,
Guiding
no, supports the
document.
as a guiding document to be used by departments of the municipality. And that pieces cannot be implemented that are outside of departmental control.
Until council, or and maybe
Uh,
as a
without-
guiding document for departments and council,
Can I insert the word operational planning? You like that,
Operational planning,
operational
yeah.
planning?
okay,
Departments for operational planning.
yeah.
For capital and operational.
And
But cannot be something like, but
But
it should not be implemented until more detailed financial planning is in place or something like that.
I'm saying that anything outside of normal business for departments shouldn't be implemented until more finances
Got it.
are, or financial analysis.
Raj, you comfortable with some wording like that? May have to smooth that up a little bit there, but.
So
Have we got
Yeah.
the gist of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was, yeah.
Okay.
supports the transportation plan in principle as a guiding document for departments for operational planning, but should not be implemented until further financial analysis has been conducted.
Can I add?
Go ahead.
No.
For discussion. The detailed implementation text of the plan for all capital projects do require council approval first. So it is written into the plan that, on a project-by-project basis, if there is a capital
page?
funding required, the whole implementation section, starting on page 47, it will require council approval. So it's acknowledged in the plan that, the capital budget needs to be approved for each of those projects.
So I think we're saying the same thing.
Yes.
Can you just read that back, Steph,
Mhm.
one more time?
That the committee support the transportation plan in principle as a guiding document for departments for operational planning, and that it not be implemented until further financial analysis has been conducted.
And that it not be, oh, okay. I
That's
didn't
not
think
really
that, didn't
what
hear,
I was
that's
saying.
not what I heard from Joyce,
Okay.
actually.
How about, and its implementation be subject to further financial,
And that it's,
rather than not be implemented?
Well, I think that there's
Or
some.
how about
sense.
individual project
Yeah.
approval be subject to further financial
Yeah.
analysis? So what you're saying is the individual components need to be reviewed before approval, but you are supporting the plan itself.
Yeah.
So it's
What
basically
may-
subject to.
Sorry, what may come out of that in a given year, council might say, we're only gonna approve $100,000 or $150,000 for for this transportation plan, and the committee's gotta go back and come back with what's their priorities if they only got 100,000 or whatever the number is. It could very well be, because we got
Yeah.
something else going, half the road fell in the ditch over here or something. Okay, given a little bit of wordsmithing may happen there, and we'll look at Raj and Steph to Emma to sort that out. Are we agreement on principle with some words like that? Everybody's good? So we got a mover,
Yeah,
you got a seconder, everybody in favor? We got a bunch of ayes, our ayes are good.
You're
Good?
being very quiet over there this morning.
It's because we rushed him and he only got one cup of coffee this morning. That's why.
Were you on the late train as well?
Yeah, it was. Emma, thanks very much. And-
We don't have one of those, Michael.
And hopefully proceed.
The late boat's not
Everybody's
late.
saying this is a great plan. It's just like, are we buying the car or the TV set?
Yeah, and it's not my decision.
Just
for
take a bit of
that,
time
but,
too from
we just wanna at least have some sort of guiding.
Yeah, I thought the detail was terrific. Okay. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think that's just
So-
worth recording before Emma leaves. You know, Emma, this is
It's a lot of
sometimes
work
to
and a lot of
support the things you want. You have to go through a really testy stage to beat out. Better to us to beat it out than have people external to this room
Because I
beat
hate
it out.
Let's
Let's
financial statements.
Now-
resolve these here and now rather than leave it to an awkward time later on when we're further down the road. So
Yeah,
please
that's what I was
don't
thinking.
misread the
Ask her if she
support
wants to
for
come
the
to the
document.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you might want to, in your intro paragraph, infrastructure projects will require time.
We're taking a 1 minute
Plan
break when he
inclusion
gets.
in the 5-year financial
Sharon,
plan
please walk down the hall.
and design.
There are two of them you can
You know,
see.
so
I see that, we're
just-
advancing the world.
Yeah.
They've got to get into the plan and that will, even if it's just a little
I'm
bit.
sorry.
I didn't have any French again to this up.
Is
It's
it
my
called the
fault.
5-year capital
There's
plan?
a 5-year financial plan.
In my mind, you always meet at 9 o'clock.
Well,
Yeah.
the capital plan is a
It's on
subset of
email
that.
about
Yeah.
later, because.
But if it's not budgeted for in the financial plan, you can't spend
But
it.
what's the
Yeah,
And even if it was a lump
Do this
amount, it
twice.
would get allocated, but
I can make you forgiven once, I mean.
Because I looked at this
Okay.
list that
So I
Raj
have
gave us,
September 19th at 9
and there's
a.m.
none of this,
I just always.
Can be
leave it at
reallocated.
9 and-
because the fire department
Planning
needs the
and finance
amounts to
group.
ride their
Yeah.
trucks
And it
every
looks like
5,
they're
10 years.
Okay.
And the
And so-
propane water is
Empty-
always
empty
gonna
that
have to do
in the last
improvements, because
And
the
we
water
can,
is
sorry.
and we
very
can put a new
And
line.
I was
It's
on
not
the-
to make
And I was on the phone to India as well,
We
trying to
can
get
put a
things.
new
You
line
speak
in
to
there to
Diane.
cover this
He
stuff.
said he's trying to
But
deal
then
with
that's
India
gonna
right
Plan
now.
was already.
No,
No,
I mean,
that's
putting
right,
a new
dealing
line
with
in there
India.
is gonna increase the
It's
taxes.
not
You
always.
water for
Well-
anybody, or?
No, I'm still trying to keep
I
it.
take advantage
It's
of
not
it, but.
intended.
That's too early, Mike.
I poured that for you.
Was it?
Yeah, instead of
Is
vodka.
that gin and tonic?
No, not today. Oh, Rod's taking it.
Christina, come back,
Oh,
join
okay,
us.
that's it.
I wasn't getting a free.
Oh, here you go.
I don't need it.
You've got the head of the table, so you can put yourself around beside Keith if you want to be more in the group.
Right, right.
Thanks, Raj.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm good, how are you?
There's no numbers there.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's no numbers there except for the community center one.
Of course, they always do separate, can't be there.
So
Yeah.
maybe 180,000 a year.
One of my kids just told me,
One of those changed, you know, but that's like dogs
I
down.
think it's, like I said, I think somebody's gotta be Robin, Peter Robin from Paul here, otherwise taxes are gonna go up.
I can't do anything about this.
No, they were from the open house last night, all of which 2 people showed up to. But,
It's nice to have a snack.
I don't know what the special one was. Oh, that was the one where all the developers were asked to come and, if they, or all the people that might need industrial space.
Yeah.
That was the one, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's, yeah. Did anybody show up?
Oh, they,
Well, it's
In the
really
way of the
about,
contractors or the volunteer or anybody
I'm
like
gonna
that?
say there's probably about a dozen people, and there's about 3 or 4 guys that didn't know. There's a couple of people who just wanted to bitch about something. The secretness of council, in fairness to the mayor.
Oh, that was because the mayor's standing committee
Yeah,
doesn't
and
have
there's
open
probably,
meetings.
might have
No,
been 2
you're
or
going
3
to
people
help
that
us.
actually built stuff there.
Okay. I never use that in fear of fact that I'll drop it and break it because it's a glass.
I know you're still getting that, so it's over my water bottle.
Okay.
I'm using it.
Great stuff.
I
Okay,
don't think you knew.
which one of you is walking us through the financial statements? Raj?
Planning
Raj?
check.
I'll walk you through the financial statements. So thank you, everybody. So this year's financial statements, we've made a few changes to the presentation and the notes. And the objective of the changes was to make the statements more succinct and easier for readers to understand. And also make the financial statements easier to compare to those of other municipalities. So the preparation and presentation of the financial statements is the responsibility of the finance department. And statements have been prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles as prescribed by the Public Sector Accounting Board and the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. So our statements are comprised of essentially four statements: a statement of financial position, statement of operations, statement of changes in net financial assets, and the statement of cash flows, and the notes to the financial statements. Notes to the financial statements are an integral part of the statements and provide expanded disclosures on the amounts that are reported in those 4 statements. The schedule of tangible capital assets and a current and prior year segmented schedule of operations, which ties into the statement of operations, is also included at the end of the financial statements. So I'm going to I'm just going to provide a quick financial overview in comparison to the previous years. BIM's overall financial position improved in 2017 by $889,000, as shown by the increase in the accumulated surplus balance on the statement of financial position. So it's the bottom line on the first statement there. Our net financial assets, which is a section of the statement of financial position, is an indicator of the amount of past revenues that are available to pay for future transactions and events, and is calculated by the value of our financial assets less our liabilities. So our net financial asset balance for 2017 of $7.5 million on the statements increased by $242,000 over 2016, which is a further indicator of improved financial position from the previous year.
Well, I do have questions as we're going along.
Can we hold the questions till the end?
Yeah.
That would be great. So BIM's non-financial assets totaled $57.3 million at 2017 year end, which is an increase of $647,000 over the 2016 year end. The increase is mostly due to capital additions during the year and is offset by disposals and amortization on assets. And in terms of our statement of operations, operational revenues totaled $8.6 million in 2017, which is an increase of $469,000 over 2016. The increase there is primarily due to contributions that were recognized from the Snug Cove House Society for the Miller Road sewer expansion, and higher fees revenue in the form of permit fees from strong construction activity during the year. For 2017, there was excess operational revenue over expenses of $889,000. If you were to take a look at all of our transfers from and to reserves, our operating costs were pretty close to our expenditures. This difference between revenues and expenses is due to following the Public Sector Accounting Board recommendations for recognizing revenues. So BIM's cash balance at the end of the year was $244,000, which was an increase of $72,000 from the 2016 year-end balance. And net book value of our tangible capital assets, which is shown on the statement of financial position, totaled $57.2 million at the end of December. And the total of these assets represents BIM's investment in infrastructure, facilities, equipment, and other capital assets. There are detailed schedules at the end of the statements that show our major groups of capital assets. So the details of that $57.2 million. In terms of our variances from budget, our revenues were short of our budget by $469,000. A large part of that was due to the way grant revenues that were anticipated for the year were recognized in the budget. We had actually recognized $902,000 more in the budget than we were able to for funding that came in for the water treatment plant. We're deferring the recognition of that revenue to match, because it's a conditional grant, to match when the expenditures occur, so when we can actually claim that grant revenue. So, and then that $900,000, would it have been? Yeah, so that $900,000 unfavorable was offset by favorable permit fees and water usage fees. We had under budgeted for water revenue in one of the water districts as well. I believe Kristen had anticipated going to a, I guess more of a
Metered rate billing.
but that didn't happen. She had actually worked that into the budget, but we didn't go, that change didn't take place. And in terms of our operating expenses, they were less than budget by $162,000 for the year. And again, they were primarily due to, in that favorable variance was primarily in the water system operations. Again, in Cove Bay Water Treatment, we had a pilot project that was included in the operating budget. Those costs were in fact capitalized. And those were offset by that. So that favorable variance of about 238 was offset by higher departmental costs that were driven by higher winter and maintenance costs by the icy and snowy winter in January and February 2017, and some extraordinary legal costs that related to the docks issue. And then moving over to our reserves. BIM's statutory reserve balance increased from $5.3 million to $5.6 million in 2017. The largest increase, as you can see from note 9 in the statements, was in the capital replacement and renewal reserve, where the 1.5% annual increase for sustainment and renewal of assets is credited. I mentioned this earlier, but note 9 of the financial statements, I changed the look of that note from prior years. I'm hoping it's easier to read, and I've condensed that note so that all of the descriptions for each of the reserves are in one place. And then I've got a schedule which shows basically the revenues, interest earned, and uses of each of the statutory reserves. I took the wording for each of the reserves from last year's financial statements, and Allison had a good point in that she can't tell by looking at those what the sources of those reserves were, so I will visit the bylaws, and for next year I'll incorporate in the notes a little bit more of a description than just the bylaw under which those reserves was established. And I'd be happy, so basically that's a summary of the financial statements. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have in the statements.
Note 9 isn't referenced anywhere on these statements.
I believe it's referenced in note 8, actually.
Okay. Yeah, because the reserve funds.
Yeah, so
Okay, so note 8.
note 8 shows the statutory reserves, and then it references note 9. Yeah.
Okay. Ah,
Okay.
right. Yeah, okay. So, I've got two little wording questions which we can discuss offline
Okay.
rather than it's just, I'm thinking taxation, the first line of the revenue should just be taxation, because general was the, yeah, and it matches with the name on the note.
Oh, okay.
And then, I don't know if anybody else is confused, but on Schedule 2, or expenses, when I think of transportation, I think of bus systems and stuff, so could that be infrastructure, parks and environment? Or roads, infrastructure, I mean, we can't make it.
Are you?
I'm on
Where are
the
you?
statement of operations,
Okay.
Page 5.
page 5, sorry.
Again, I use the terminology that I've seen used at other municipalities.
Yeah.
So they have a transportation, but, I mean, we can change that
I guess
wording if the committee.
I don't, it just, when I think of transportation, I think of a bus or the ferry or something, and.
Shouldn't be any more now that we've got that report.
But infrastructure means the library building, the park, the roads, the culverts, everything, so.
So my manager suggested roads, parks, and environment, because I think that's what, it had parks and environments before, so she
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
added roads. I don't know, it's totally your call, what you want to call it.
I mean, I'd like roads, parks, and environment,
I kind of like roads too.
Yeah.
because that's really,
Because otherwise you're thinking of the mayoral car or something.
yeah.
So that's you're just talking about the tarmac now, you're just talking about
Yeah.
solid roads, right?
Yeah.
That's what it is. And that's-
Well, there's culverts that go under.
Yeah, yeah,
also.
yeah, yeah.
People are gonna look
Yeah.
at 2.7 million and go, gulp, but if they know it's
Yeah.
roads, they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So in our operating statements, it would be perfectly fine to go with roads, because most of those expenditures are roads.
yeah.
But in our capital program, we do call it transportation, and I would like it to remain transportation in our capital projects, because you can group like projects together. So it doesn't make sense in our, I mean, we're not talking capital here, but just so that we're kind of clear, this is only operating costs, so I think roads is
Okay.
reasonable too.
I don't think we need to
Joyce, did you
regard
have any
it.
comment? I know you're about to boot out the door here. Joyce, do you have any
No,
comment?
actually, Raj's summary answered all of my
Oh,
questions, so I
great.
don't need to ask him any.
Gold star for Raj this morning.
Actually, the notes were, I have to compliment you on the notes there.
Yeah.
It did say, I remember last year there seemed to be a shorter exercise
Yeah,
altogether.
we cut them back a bit last year.
Yes.
And Ross has cut them back some more this year.
Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
appreciated.
so my only other major one, I've got a few little typos, is the, I'm trying to find it, the surplus. Is there some way to reference, because we've lost this, the functions, expenses by functions note and the detail of the fees. So is there some way we can reference the schedules? So when somebody's actually reading the statement of operations, they'll, oh, what breaks up taxation? Well, there's a note, but all the other stuff is detailed out more, the fees and charges and the different expenses in the segmented schedule. So is there some way to,
So,
Reference.
so you're referring to at the top of statement of operations, it says Schedule 2 at the top. Is that what you're referring to?
well, on this page, if you were looking at this, if you're one of those highlight skimmers,
Yeah.
you're not gonna think to go, oh, I'd like to know a little more detail about that. Is there some way to direct them here to the schedule, or is
Yeah,
the
so
schedule
it
audited?
does
or-
have that one Schedule 2 beside revenues and Schedule 2 beside expenses, but,
Oh, right, sorry, I totally missed that.
okay, I just wanted to make sure that's what you were asking.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, and I
Thanks.
totally missed
Thanks,
it.
Joyce.
So thank you,
Thank you.
that's numbers there. Have fun in town.
Oh, not going to town.
Oh, okay. Well, have fun then, if you're going to the ferry.
Grandchildren.
Yeah, well, that's more fun. Okay, so my only other is that the note on surplus.
So no,
Note 8, which is page 14. Unappropriated surplus is $4 million, but going back to our conversation we just had with Emma, and that schedule that was handed out, it's, $1 million of that is been earmarked, but there's also, the water and sewer funds have balances in their surpluses, and
Those are, those are
Yeah.
included in that.
I know, but they're
Yeah.
not unappropriated, I mean, we can't touch those money, they can only be used for water and sewer. And so I think the water, and they've always been detailed out separately, so in thinking about it, which as I said to Christine, people always hate it when I said I've been thinking, that implies to me, using the word unappropriated, that we could do whatever we wanted with that $4 million. And we can't, because close to 2 million of it belongs to the water and sewer systems.
Now, again, I have to defer this question to Christine, but from other municipalities, they have the same situation where they have water and
But-
sewer surpluses, and they are,
But we're not other municipalities, ours are specified areas, and those assets, all the expenses of those specified areas and all the revenue is all contributed by those specified areas, and we can't use it for anything else. So they're appropriated. So if you want to call it unappropriated surplus for like 3 million or 2 million, and appropriated surplus water and sewer funds for the other. But I think it's misleading to,
would we be able to handle that with a further disclosure note that says the unappropriated surplus includes?
which is what we did in the past.
yeah, I think I would recommend, just pulling out the water and sewer.
Sewer,
and just
okay.
set it out. We could do that.
Okay.
Show it separately.
Yeah.
or-
Yeah.
Well,
So
we-
we'll have 5 lines instead of 3
Yeah,
lines.
hopefully that means we could squeeze them all in without, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
because there's lots of room in the reserve
We
fund
can make it
page
happen.
to go down.
Sort of piggyback on that while we're on that, I know it's the same as last year, but I look at page 5, and we got the water and sewer operations, and there's whatever that is, $1.4 million in costs. And I was a little slow when I read this, and I hadn't quite looked at Schedule 2, which I know I can pick the numbers off Schedule 2, but they're kind of self-supporting assets in a way. And I don't think if you read page 5, you get that idea. It looks like we're pouring $1.4 million into them, but effectively, there's offsetting revenue, in fact, more than offsetting revenue. If I go to Schedule 2, I know I got circles around those numbers there, you can pick it off the page. I don't know how you highlight that.
So the discussion we did have is that's mostly in your fees and charges.
But again,
But you
it's,
could split out water and sewer charges separately if you wanted to.
Can you put the revenue, all I'm trying to do is assume that the revenue, whatever the heck that number is, $1,762,000, is buried in the 8,596.
Most of it's in fees and charges. The actual
In the
fees and charges.
1679.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. So what you've got there is the bulk of that number supports the cost base on the bottom two lines.
I would support.
But your
splitting
eyes
out
kind of
water
glaze over
revenue
if you get,
And sewer revenue out of fees and charges.
I'm with that, that's where I'm headed.
Well, can't we actually, we have, just a question
Sure.
for you again, because I'm trying to keep this statement simple
Simple.
and consistent. So Schedule 2 does tell you that when you go to that. So when you go to
but the
Schedule
quick
2,
and dirty
you can
reader
see
isn't
the,
going to read Schedule
Pardon?
2. The quick and dirty reader isn't going to read Schedule 2.
I think you gotta think of
And,
the
well, and
audience, you got
that's- I think-
unsophisticated people, they're gonna read it and go,
well, that's
well,
the
we're
whole idea.
spending a lot of
for-
money on that.
The quick and dirty reader is, my opinion is a quick and dirty reader isn't gonna care what the fees and charges
Well,
or
yes,
revenue
they-
is
no,
made up of, but the careful
What if-
reader is gonna go to
But Raj,
Schedule
what if you
2 to
just-
look at it, look it up.
Let's just put one
Yeah.
line on there. Yeah, I'm assuming it's buried in a 1679.
It is,
Understand what
yeah.
you said.
And it's easy to pull out.
So
yeah.
you've got sewer and water revenue, or fees, or whatever we
You could have
technically call
one
it.
line water and sewer fees.
Yeah,
if you
it
want.
Yeah.
can be one line.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
we
one
could do
line,
that.
and you could put down other fees.
We
So I'm
could
sure
put
there's some
fees and
miscellaneous,
charges
which
general.
must be pretty low, the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, fees and charges, general fund, and fees and charges, utilities? Or
I
water?
think I would just say water and sewer fees. Or
Water
and sewer
or
fees,
vice
okay.
versa.
Yeah.
That's what you had in the
And
past,
then-
actually.
And then other fees and charges.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the 1,200 users of the municipal systems, there's another 1,000
Okay.
lots that pay their own way. And they're gonna look and say, water and sewer systems, I'm not paying for those. And so they won't understand, yeah.
Why do we have separate lines, water and sewer?
Because they're specified areas.
In
And water's different from
You're
sewer.
combining those two lines on the
In the
bottom.
expense section, yeah.
I could get onto that.
Yeah.
Why not? If you're
Well, if
doing
you're
it
gonna
above.
combine the revenue, then you
Yeah.
need to combine the expenses.
Well, it's good, what's for once for t'other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
What do you
split
guys
them
think
out
about that?
separately.
I would suggest having
Do separate
maybe
lines for the
three revenue lines, just because these line right up with the charges.
So you break out the revenue at the top and then break out the
Three.
expenses at the bottom?
I think we got lots of room here.
Yeah.
And I
We're
think-
complicating Raj's statement here. We're adding more lines.
Well, we went
For
from
the
here
water?
to here, and then we're
Yeah.
just gonna squeak a little bit up.
Well, I think
Just-
water and sewer costs are already separated,
Yes.
so
Sure.
my understanding is all we're doing is adding
The
2
revenue.
additional revenue
Yes.
lines,
Yeah.
a water
Yeah.
fees and a sewer fee.
Keith was trying to get rid of one line, though. He was trying to help you out here.
Yeah,
Well,
One line
I
or two
think
lines,
they're
yes.
very separate, because the water people don't want to think that they're paying for the sewer.
yeah, remember the audience that attends
Yeah.
these meetings on finance?
But there's the.
The
one-
audience is packed.
But the other reason, I mean, but it is, the statements will get more scrutiny this year being an election year. So we don't need to.
One other comment along the sophistication of the reader. Can I go to I think note 3 on page 11? This is at the bottom, portfolio investments. I think it's good disclosure for what it is, but the average reader is gonna read that and say, we got $12 million in the bank. How come we got $12 million in the bank? Why can't I have that in my bank account and not your bank account?
And less property taxes, yeah.
So I'm just wondering, and some of this is in the reserves,
Mhm.
so I wonder if either there in that note or somewhere we say the above funds are allocated to various capital reserves, or for working capital, or to buy the finance committee their annual per diem, or something or other.
Our annual per diem, oh, okay.
Whatever.
Yeah, actually, I think the point is, it just doesn't look like loose money there that we just happen to be, anyone, it's to stop someone saying, oh, why are you sitting on over $10 million, and we aren't, but
And I'm overdrawn on my Visa account. Like,
yeah.
marry those two things up.
So maybe an additional paragraph that reads to the effect of reserve funds and cash not required for immediate use is invested
That's it, right?
in
If somebody
portfolio
walked in your
investments.
office with a full head of steam on and said, why do you have 12 million bucks in the bank?
Yeah.
What are the 2-3 points you'd make to them? And I'm not saying here, but that's the
Yeah.
way I would try and
Yeah.
word it.
Yeah.
The reason we have 12 million bucks is A, B, and C,
Okay.
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think,
And I wouldn't say too much, I would refer mostly over to the note 9, 8.
Yeah, in fact, you
Yeah.
could say that, yeah.
Yeah,
Because of reserves,
A
brackets, so you know,
large-
so and so, yeah.
a large portion of these
Okay.
funds represent our reserves bracket note 9 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're okay?
We
Okay.
can add that.
Other questions? Allison, how you doing?
Just a minute here.
Actually, I thought it read, to be honest, it seemed to flow easier than last year, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head where the difference is. Is it we've shortened it, we've simplified it, we've cut out some of the...
In a lot of places. We did a whole bunch of changes last year, and I think we've made some more changes
Yes,
this year.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
consistency of language, there was a lot of additional notes that had built over time last year, and I think Raj should take them up.
I guess couple questions on the continuity reserve fund on page 15. Mount Gardner Dock, is that $538 in the right column? How do we have negative interest?
I believe at the end of the year, the investments, MFA investments had an adjustment downwards in the bond funds. And so that's why it is actually negative interest. It looks odd.
But is it interest or negative?
Well, it was
Right, market
actually
value
a
right
it's
down.
market value right down.
So maybe we need to change the interest earned to just earnings or something, because it looks odd to have negative
True.
interest.
Yeah.
True.
We could actually move that line over into the expenses and transfers.
What if we called it something like fund return, or something like that, because it...
Investment return or something.
Yeah, because if it's priced to market, it's really net fund return, or whatever
Yeah,
word you
so
like.
is the bond
something
fund
like that.
priced to market, is that?
That's probably what it is, it's probably priced at the market or something,
Yeah.
I would think.
Instead of interest earned, okay, or
Or
terminology there.
funds earned, or
Yeah,
Well-
something like that.
I'll work that out with Christine as
Yeah,
well.
investment earnings or something, because you've got revenues and transfers, and revenues would be contributions, I assume.
Yeah.
So should that be contributions rather than transfers? Or rather than revenues, I mean?
Or we could just call it transfers in and transfers out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, except the 220s are actually contributions from somebody. They were,
That can still be called a transfer in terms of terminology, because the contribution is a transfer into the reserves. So I
yeah,
kind of like Christine's,
Or contributions and transfers and
yeah,
the same for
expenses
expenses,
and
because
transfers.
basically, we never actually spend money out of, we transfer them into and then spend them on. But you see, if you look at the roads maintenance one, we put 500 in, and then we actually spent 473,000 on roads maintenance last year.
Yeah, I prefer expenditures to expenses just because if it's capital, right?
Yeah, it could be, yes, it is. And my other one is just a general understanding. We've got a roads disposition in the capital. How do you, and I asked Raj
Sorry,
this
can
question.
you,
I'm trying to find, somewhere in one of the statements, we've disposed of some roads.
so this is the roads where we had actually replaced
yes, I was
the
gonna say.
the road surface, so we have a deemed disposition of what we had acquired. And this is where Allison was saying, but we ground up the road, it's still there, it's like you,
Yeah,
my understanding is when you pave a road, previous costs that you've capitalized when you're paving over the same road, they come out of your capital
Yes.
schedule, and that's standard practice.
Is that your question, Alice?
well, yeah, because the pavement's still left there. We didn't dispose of anything, and with the pavement that we took
I would
up,
say that
we ground it up and put it down again.
Well, but we would say that it didn't last as long as we originally thought it was going to last. So we're almost depreciating it quicker. So if we spent 10 grand on a piece of road and it only lasts 2 years instead of 10
Yeah.
years, we're impairing it. Because now we've put, you don't want to have double the costs in there. Right?
Okay.
So you mean you really are writing it down?
Yeah. Write it down because
Yeah.
It didn't last.
It didn't last, you've got to write it down, it has no
It's more
residual
that it didn't
value.
last
She
as
gonna
long.
stay?
Makes sense.
She was here for the transportation plan.
Oh, I see, okay. We do open the private meetings to councillors.
Well, this isn't private.
Okay.
We're not enclosed yet.
All right.
Okay, all right. So I have a little wording correction on the motion. Because section 167.1 in the community charter says the financial statements must be presented to council for its acceptance. So I think we have to say that Finance Advisory Committee recommends
Council accepts.
that council accept the 2017 audited financial
Okay.
statements.
They don't approve? Accept and approve?
No, they don't.
They don't approve?
No, the wording says presented to council for its acceptance, period.
Jesus. I've never seen that on the board, I mean, except for
No, no, it's
everybody gets.
different from a board, it's different from a board, it's the local, it's the community charter wording,
Wow,
yeah,
okay.
Accept.
yeah.
Is everybody happy with the modified motion?
I'm good with that. With the modifications
Is it
discussed or something?
As amended.
As amended, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
And then
Right.
I guess,
Sorry.
is that, do we want to say as presented at the finance committee's May, as amended at the May, finance committee's May?
Yep, I like that wording,
Because
something like
if we don't
that.
put finance committee in there, then it's going to be presented at council's May 14th meeting, and it will not make sense.
Because you get the subject to changes as made at the meeting or whatever
No,
it
we
is.
just say as
On the fly.
amended rather than as presented.
That sounds more sophisticated. Raj, you okay with that?
It's your word of the day.
All right. Do you want a councillor to be involved in the motion? What's the political sensitivities
Oh,
there?
I don't care.
Doesn't
All right, I'm
matter.
going to second Keith's motion then. Think you good with this, huh?
Oh, yeah,
That's the only reason we got you out of bed this
yeah.
morning.
I know.
You got that, Steph?
Yeah, that the committee recommend that council accept the 2017 audited financial statements as presented at the.
As amended.
As amended.
Okay, I have at the end of the sentence, but I'll put it there.
Yeah.
As presented as amended at the May 2nd.
Take presented out and replace it with amended.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, just
as amended at that, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Financial statements as amended at the May 2nd, 2018 Financial Advisory Committee meeting.
Yeah.
So, okay, perfect. All right, so that's, all right, I'm on 6.2 without reading it out. We're gonna
We
move,
missed 5.1, which has your garbage thing on it.
got it, oh, wait, my garbage thing.
Review of action items, very last
Yeah,
page.
yeah.
Can we defer that discussion to the closed meeting?
Sure, I'm cool with that,
Because then I can get Raj's workload off his table.
yeah,
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
With those comments, I'm looking at 6.2, I just read that into the public domain, and we're gonna move to a closed meeting. Can I just before we do that, just one comment, I notice we got the next meeting on September the 19th. Can we leave, maybe don't put it in the minutes, but an understanding is, we may wanna have some discussion about the funding of this transportation plan before then, is what I'm
And the
thinking.
asset
Raj.
management plan.
Yeah, maybe we're at your call, since you're doing all the work. So maybe working with Emma and whoever else, you figure you've got the capital budget reviewed or updated or
And
whatever
I
you want to
don't-
call it.
I don't
In
think
terms
I'll
of
be
this
around on
funds
September
allocation, that you
19th
can let us know, I'm good to go. Okay.
And I think September 19th has, go away. It's either UBCM or Islands Trust.
So what's the date we're looking at now, September?
Well, I have a meeting on the 19th. This might be a supplemental meeting before that. This
Oh, I
is just-
can't come on the
Are we
19th.
closed now?
Pardon me?
We in the open for
I-
this meeting?
We're
Has
just
it
talking
been
about the
adjourned
next
for the
meeting.
open?
No, we're still kind of
No, we're still
opening.
We're open?
We're open still.
We
sorry.
have a finance group meeting planned for 9 o'clock on Wednesday.
That's what I got, yeah.
September the
Okay,
19th.
and I will be on Keats for the Islands Trust Quarterly Council meeting from the 18th, 19th, and 20th of September. So it's either gotta be Monday the 17th.
I can do any day that week.
Okay, well, can we change it to Monday the 17th then?
Let's just have a look.
Keith, can you handle the Monday?
Yeah.
Can you handle that?
What time?
Oh, in the first thing in the morning.
First thing, is that easier for you?
So,
Or do you want to come home or do it later in the afternoon so you can come home a little earlier, which is easier?
later in the afternoon,
Okay,
because
so,
Monday's a bit-
Sure, what time? What time for you, Keith? 2:20 ferry, plus something.
2:20 ferry, yeah.
okay,
So
so
3
3 o'clock on
3
the
o'clock?
17th.
3 o'clock?
Okay,
You good for
On
3?
the 17th?
All right, so the
Yeah.
19th meeting is canned, and we're 3 o'clock on Monday the 17th.
okay. And any future meetings at the call of the theater.
Yeah, and then recognizing there may be a short meeting regarding how we fund this transportation plan at the call of the Director of Finance or
And there's a couple of
whatever your official title is.
other things will come up.
Yeah, it might be something else coming up.
Okay,
Okay,
Okay, so you should
now,
have received a calendar invite for that time.
We have just got it.
okay.
yeah, don't send anything out yet.
No, it's out,
It's out.
Oh.
She's
and it's
sent-
never gonna change. Oh,
Okay,
No,
well-
you send it out for the Monday, the 17th at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. Now we're turning the camera off.
All right, I have now read item 6.2. We're now closing up.
alright, hold on.
You turn the camera.
Yeah.
Camera off. 2 minutes stretch.
Okay, everybody.
This is a, okay, oh, I just brought my phone. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
You're good. Sophie?
I will move.
Thank you.
One second.
Thank you, Jess.
Read that later.
Are there any late items to add to the agenda? Anyone?
Jen, are you going to update us on the status of night landings?
What I need is a pen. Sure, we can add that. I can tell you what little I know.
Okay, great.
New business, 7.3. Do you want to line this stuff? Okay. We'll try to get that, get to that while our colleague from BC Ambulance is here.
That's great. There it is.
Okay, and if everyone's had a chance to take a look at the minutes, I'm sure you all read them very thoroughly.
Oh, yeah.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting of January? We haven't seen each other in a while. Go Paula. Yeah, sure. Carolyn. Can someone second the adoption of the minutes?
Sure.
Thank you, Bob. Okay. Oh, the time for public comment. So we do technically have a member of the public with us today. Would you like to introduce yourself? I invited him to sit at the table.
David Dales, I'm actually working with Con today as a part-time paramedic, but I'm an assistant chief with the District of Vancouver. One of my portfolios is emergency management.
Thanks. We'll go around and do updates like we normally do really quickly if everyone doesn't mind. So just introduce yourselves to Con and Dave and let them know what your role is when you do
I'm
things.
Carolyn McDonald, and I'm the ESS director.
I'm Denise Richard, and I have also the coordinator of NERPS, as also support a little bit of outreach for ESC. I am Tess, I work for the municipality as a bylaw officer and in the planning department, and I am also part of ESS. I'm a volunteer with ESS as a receptionist manager.
Bob Robinson, Public Works.
Paul Arriaga, Corporal from RCP.
Bruce Steele, Emergency Communications Director and a member of the ESS team.
I'm Bonnie Brokenshire, and I'm the manager of Parks and Environment and Senior Officer.
I'm Con Brakey, I'm the unit chief of the Fulham Station. I'm Sophie Tinga, Communications Coordinator for the municipality, ESS volunteer, EOC team member, and I think that's all in this capacity.
I'm Stephanie, I'm the committee clerk.
Does anyone have any updates from their respective organizations that they'd like to share with the group? We'll start with Carolyn.
We're still selling emergency preparedness supplies. I'll pass around our newsletter. We do a newsletter every couple of months. And you've also got, I gave everybody some information on Emergency Preparedness Week, which is next week. We have a display at the school, some notices up on the ferry and a couple of other places. And if you've already got a household plan, pass it on to somebody else to sort of just keep the ball rolling. And also I put it out on Facebook. Yeah, I think that, we're gonna have an ESS meeting tonight, anybody's welcome to come along. And I'm gonna test everybody out on an emergency preparedness bingo game that I put together. And that's gonna be used for emergency preparedness for the youth at the school and to the seniors. That's it.
So you're testing out the game on us, is that the idea?
Yeah,
Excellent. Excellent.
Any news from the NERPs?
We have a gathering coming up next couple weeks from now, and it's we're in the process of creating the presentation, the Bowen style presentation, I'm going to say. So we're working on that. Other than that, it's a bit slow. Looking to pick it up a bit. Me? I'm just looking forward to lots of new training coming up. It's exciting.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report.
Nothing to report this time.
Why don't you report on what we're doing?
No, I talked the whole meeting.
Yeah. We're meeting with Port Metro, and we're meeting with representatives from
Western Canada Marine Response Corporation.
Yeah, just about marine issues. And that's soon, that's in a couple of weeks, so little field trip. And that's it, and then I know that Jen had budgeted for some spill equipment, so I know that's in the 218 budget, so we just have to figure out what we can get with the amount that we allotted. Which was how much, Jen, was it that we allotted for
Actually, it's
that?
news to me, what you're saying. I remember putting in the request, but I never heard any further about it, so I can't recall. I want to say $2,500.
Yeah, I think that's.
But I'll look at that. Thanks.
I have nothing new.
Sophie, anything on the communications front you want to tell us about?
I don't really have anything recent to report. I know we're doing a few things coming up, which is Emergency Preparedness Week, just doing a little social media promotion of that. And I'm just looking at the action items here. To see if I had any. Yes.
Right on.
Yeah. Other than that,
We're also, Sophie and I are about to meet to discuss the HRBA and getting that information out to the public, so letting the public know that it's been completed, that council, once they adopt it, that council's adopted it, and also sort of providing people with information on how they can participate in future updates if they'd like to. So we'll work on that this week or next week. Okay, quickly racing through the information items. So for those of you that don't know, so I'm just down to 8.1 right now. There are over 15, I believe there are 17 municipal-owned AEDs that are publicly accessible to members of the community or visitors. The AED program is now part of the emergency program, and we've established a network of volunteers that are able to do the maintenance checks on those AEDs. So every 6 months, someone just has to go make sure it's still in good working order. And so we've set up a group of volunteers across the island that take care of that, usually people that live right next to it. So that's what's going on with those. 8.2, so I wasn't at this council meeting, but they discussed the night landing issue. I've got another email into BC Ambulance to try and get an update on the status. As most of you are aware, there was the hope that with the implementation of night vision goggle technology, our night landing problem would be solved, and then subsequently some discussion that we discovered that perhaps that wasn't the case. So we're still waiting for an answer from them.
Can I ask you a question? Sure. What is the issue with night landing?
That's
Is it an operations issue with BCAS without proper lighting, or just exactly? Can you give me a short synopsis?
Yeah, they've provided us with a copy of the SMS report that was run, but it's a combination of trees, approach, one way in, one way out. I can share the report with you. It's also publicly available, so.
Okay.
Jen, sorry, I'm going to jump in soon enough. So the AEDs, I noticed in the winter they're not, some of them are vacant, like they're vacant, the little houses in the winter. So what happens with them in the winter?
So that was news to me this winter, but when the temperature drops below 0 degrees and they're stored outside, the adhesive on the pads doesn't work, and so they won't stick to the patient. So the protocol seems to be that the AEDs are brought into the warmth at the nearest location, and a note is left in the AED house indicating where they are. Oh dear.
I can just see someone in a panic emergency getting to the house that they know where it is and with a little box and it not being there, and it could be quite distressing.
It doesn't strike me as completely ideal, although getting there and having it not work is also not an acceptable situation. And the houses, the places where they are stored are steps from the box that they would normally be in, so it's still very accessible. But it does open a whole other can of worms about accessing people's homes.
So my wooden paddle idea was not?
Wooden paddle, yeah, so you could hold it down. I didn't go much further with that, but I could look into it if you'd like. Yeah, I mean, if anyone has a better idea, I'm certainly open to suggestions. It was sort of news to me. I didn't realize that they had to be brought inside, so I felt like we were sort of on the back foot trying to figure out what to do with them this year. So now that we have some time to ponder it further, I'd happily take suggestions if anyone has better ideas for AED storage when it's below 0. Does that answer your question? Do you want to speak to the night landing issue at all?
I can, yeah. I do have something about the AEDs though before we move on.
Sure.
Are you familiar with the Pulse Point app that just came out recently? Has that been disseminated? Do you find it useful?
Tell the group.
Okay, so BC Ambulance has, there's an app called Pulse Point. Let's pull it up right now. So it sort of looks like this when you open it. It's free, you can download it, and the idea is anybody can have this on their phone. It'll send, if the 911 call for an appropriate response is generated, it will trigger an alert on this app. Whoever has the app on their phone will just pop up, and it goes by your GPS locator. If you're close by, it'll say CPR needed or an AED needed within 5 minutes of where you are. So the idea is it's just for the general public, so if somebody were to, if the 911 call comes in at the grocery store, anybody close by will get this alert on their phone, it'll ring, oh, I'm right there right now, and off you can go to help. And if you happen to be one of those people who knows where the AEDs are, that can be a benefit. Anyway, it just came out a few months ago. Random calls pop up from time to time. We're nowhere near where I am. I've been letting it run and just seeing what it does. I've never been in an area where it's been relevant because I haven't been close enough, but if you do have AEDs located around the island and people who are interested in helping, I mean, it could potentially help that way.
Con, If that does put out an alert, will it show via, say, Google Maps where the AED is? In other words, does it tell you the location of the AED?
That might be something that would have to be a custom program. I don't know if it'll tell you where the incident is and where the help is needed, for
Yeah.
sure. But it'll give you an address. So for example, I'm looking at one right now, there's a traffic collision in Surrey, and if I click on it, it pulls up a map with an icon right there for
Okay,
me.
super.
So I just clicked on the incident, it popped up, that's an old one from, it's 11 minutes ago.
Right.
So it gives me a Google map of where it is. If there are wait a sec here, there's an AED button right here. Yeah,
So it has that capability.
so I just clicked on the AED button and about 50 popped up all.
Wonder if you have to register the AEDs on.
I imagine you would have to.
Yeah.
So those are already registered. All of our
Yeah.
AEDs are registered with BC Ambulance, so they should pop up.
Can you scroll to Bowen with that now and see if it shows the AEDs?
You know, media's got this, right?
So
Oh yeah, look, there they are right there.
Amanda Ocleon's
Good
been
stuff.
trying
Yeah.
to promote that app.
Oh, sweet, okay.
Yeah, so if there's an AED close by and, yeah,
Cool.
Very good.
What's it called? Pulse?
Pulse Point.
Pulse point.
And it's, sort of looks like a GPS white locator with a heart in the middle, a red heart, red and white. Cool.
We can put a link in the minutes actually. We did one social media blast about the app when it first came out, and I know Amanda Ocleon, who's the first aid trainer on the island, has been doing a lot to promote it as well, so I'm sure the public will hear more about it at the open house for the fire department, for example, and other community events. I know there's been concern expressed by community members that if they're alone and their spouse or partner experiences cardiac arrest or a cardiac event and they need an AED, how do they go get it? They don't want to leave the person, CPR needs to be delivered. So this might help address that concern that exists out there.
Good.
Has it been used at all on Bowen? Like, has anyone,
The AED?
the
Not that I know
like,
of. No, not that
Doesn't show a history there.
not that I've heard of.
That'd come under privacy.
It would only be an address.
Yeah.
Patient's name, any personal information wouldn't be accessible. Yeah.
and it would be up to the 911 dispatch to indicate whether it's something that gets.
Yeah, there's a criteria that would, pretty much anything where the general public could be of assistance, immediate CPR, AED, things like that would be pushed through. Yeah.
Good.
Night landings, so there was a memo sent out a couple weeks ago, just updating everybody about the night vision goggles. The pilots have all been approved, they've been signed off, but only for, it's a sort of a tiered system. They're only approved to be flying with night vision on their approved routes. Bowen Island does not meet that criteria. And there's a lot of big Transport Canada restrictions around those. Has to be so far from flight paths and things like that. I'm not aware of all of them, but what I do know is Bowen has not been approved yet for them to fly in and maintain that flight path where they used to come. What the pilots need to do is just get X amount of hours with the goggles before they can get signed off to that next tier. I believe BC Ambulance is applying for some sort of workaround. It's a fairly restrictive policy from Transport Canada. It's a lot of hours the pilots have to accumulate. So that's why they're trying to get around that system and get them approved right away. Once they're approved for those landings over in Bowen, that should open up the island again to their night landings.
Really? You have that part, that last part officially?
Should. Should.
Should.
Yeah.
Just check it off.
I'm not a pilot and I don't work for Transport Canada, so I can't say for sure.
Okay.
But it did say those flight paths that aren't already pre-established, which are, you know, they're almost like, they're like highways, so the pilots can't deviate, right? So
Good. I hope that that is
it's moving forward
excellent.
slowly.
Wasn't there a renewal of contract with the provider recently? Wasn't it, it was up for renewal?
It was up for renewal, but there was also an extension clause, so they might have been extended but not renewed, or renewed completely, or.
Because I remember that the municipal, the council level, they were
going to be maybe having some conversations with the province to sort of advocate for the service provider to, you know, do what they can, like, because they could put in provisions in the contract to ensure that, or move along the process, especially if they have to do a certain number of hours, like things like that. So I don't know if that ever happened, if there was any
I know that
advocating.
I know that council did advocate at UBCM and that there were discussions with, I want to say, an assistant deputy minister who seemed to be very confident that with night vision goggle technology, we would have the service reinstated. But subsequent attempts to follow up on that have not been successful on the part of our CAO. So I'm trying, and Kathy's trying to communicate with BC Ambulance about it. But hopefully I'll know more next meeting.
This renewal of contract, are you talking, is this the
Yeah.
supplier of the ambulance service?
Yeah.
So.
Helijet.
Helijet, right.
For this area. So I think that we covered off 7.3 there, which is good because I believe Con has to go early. So if you're not here, you were able to contribute to that discussion. Thank you.
Good.
Anything else on night landings, anyone? Okay. So much for a quick review of the information items. 8.3, oh, the island survey. So this is a little light reading for anyone who has time. Would you mind just passing those out? So the island survey, there were some relevant bits to emergency management. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up in front of me. So you can see, sorry, I'm gonna steal this. Page 8 of the island survey was sort of an overall satisfaction question, and there's questions there related to the emergency preparedness program and the emergency notification system. And then page 16 of the survey, questions around how prepared people are for different types of emergencies. And then there was an open-ended part of the survey where people could just write whatever they wanted about emergency preparedness, and that was educational, informative, and entertaining. Some of them provided really valuable feedback that should be taken into account. Others seemed perhaps uninformed, and so there's an opportunity there for education, and some were just plain old hilarious. So if you get a chance to go through the document that Sophie's got at another time, I recommend it.
She's amused already.
And so that's linked on our website, I believe, linked in this agenda as well. And I'd encourage members of the committee to sort of have a quick look so you can get an idea of where those respondents are in terms of emergency preparedness. It's hard to say how reflective it is of the island as a whole because 600 people responded, and obviously it's not a random sample of the population. So not sure how much exactly we can take out of it, but there's certainly some information that will be useful in doing some of our planning, particularly in terms of public outreach and education. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. And then 8.4, the vital conversations.
So just council had asked that the island survey results and the vital conversation results be circulated to all of the committees. So.
Thanks. So have a glance at that at your convenience. So 4.3, I really quickly wanted to update everyone on the Union of BC Municipality Grants because I'm not sure what the last piece of information you got from me was, but essentially we've been approved for 3 at this point. Over $24,000 for emergency social services is coming to the municipality within the next 12 months, and that's going to fund ESS training, volunteer recruitment and retention initiatives, and supply purchases. So we've bought a lot of supplies for the reception center, and we now have group lodging supplies for the first time ever, I believe. So we could put up 15 people on the boat if we had to. And then it's also going towards some of our public outreach work with ESS. The EOC, Emergency Operations Center grant, was also approved for $25,000. That's going to fund rapid damage assessment training, crisis communication training, EOC supplies and equipment, so computers, phones, tables, chairs, and radio equipment. We now have, or are about to have, a pack door system, which allows
Correct.
us to send email via amateur radio.
Yeah. The ECT team will all have this, as of now, all have the same radio, all have the same programming, and will soon be, with the new equipment from that grant, we'll soon be able to do email via WinLink, what's called a WinLink system, and we will have email to wherever we want via the radios.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We applied for and received a $10,000 Fire Smart grant, so that's going to go towards community education and a vegetation management campaign. So we're still hammering out the details of exactly what that will look like, but expect to hear more, particularly from the fire chief on that. And finally, there's an evacuation route planning funding stream, but that stream is still in development, so I'll keep you posted. As soon as I can apply for that, I absolutely will be. Anyone have any questions about grants or UBCM granting? Okay, good. Oh, the action items. So we're on to 5.1. I'm gonna really quickly go through these. Oh, we're still waiting for somebody to come pick up our 1950s era hospital kit, but apparently that's in the works. The Quake Cottage for shakeout is pending, including rapid damage assessment on future agendas for further discussion is also ongoing. Providing information about the notification system to the visitor center and island B&Bs has occurred to some degree, but I'm going to leave it on there because there's more work to do in getting some of our local tourism operators a little bit more prepared if possible. Okay, include final update to committee. This one's done, January 2018. Identify for the committee a list of projects we feel are important. So I started trying to track sort of the things that come up in these meetings that are larger projects that we're interested in, and I've just put them as potential future work plan items, just so that they're captured somewhere. And I've included different things that we have discussed at previous meetings. I can't speak to Robin Fenton's items, so we'll leave those as pending, and she's not here. The one about the RCMP station is done. The ongoing discussions with Metro Vancouver is pending. I have not presented to the executive committee on the disaster support hubs yet. I'll do that next time. The flags is still pending. The emergency guide suggestions were presented to the communications committee, so that's done. And I've added that discussion to the next agenda. So lots of these are done. Hopefully you'll see a shorter list, hopefully, at the next meeting. Anyone have questions about the action items? It's pretty straightforward. Okay, moving smoothly forward. Okay, 6.1, emergency management plan. So as I mentioned, the HRVA is going on the next council meeting agenda. I'm not sure whether or not it'll be sent back to staff for further revision, but to my mind that's sort of done at this point, or for now. And the next step is to update the emergency management plan. So the Emergency Program Executive Committee has already passed a resolution instructing staff to begin the process. And I thought a good first step might be for us to read it. So I've read the emergency management plan, but certainly the staff on this committee are going to be involved in the update of it, and it might make sense for us all to take a look at it. So that's your homework. It looks a little bit scarier than it is. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but a lot of it is appendices. So I'm not asking that you read the entire disaster financial assistance guidelines that are appended to the plan. But if you could take a look at the bulk of the plan, the meat of it, and at least have have read it or glanced over it, that would be a helpful first step in working on this update. So we'll probably break it off into manageable pieces, and some of them will be more obvious. Obviously, Sophie will probably be working on the communications section of the plan. Some of it will be less obvious, so if you want to pick something that you're interested in, I recommend that. Otherwise, we're just going to have to assign bits and pieces to people and plow forward. So that's our next big project. I didn't think we'd start today, but it's a good idea for everyone to familiarize themselves with what we currently have. We won't be throwing it out completely. It'll be an update of the existing plan.
And where is the plan?
Online.
Online in the
So,
beginning?
it's on the municipal website. If you go to the emergency program page, it's there, it should be at the bottom. And then we also have physical copies here, if anyone wants to take a hard copy. I think I have some here with me today, actually. So happy to provide paper copies for anyone that prefers that to reading online. Does anyone have any questions about the emergency plan update? Objections, discussion? We're all really excited. Okay, I think it'll be good. We're looking at updating what is a base plan that'll have supporting plans as documentation. So it's still the emergency management plan, but you know, if we identify things that needs to be supported by, this is the time to do so. So for example, if there isn't enough about communication and we don't want to be really, really prescriptive in that plan, we can approve or send up for approval the emergency management plan with sort of an overarching policy as opposed to a procedure-based plan, and then create another one further down the road that would be more procedural. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward. That there can be supporting plans and documents that don't have to be part of the actual management plan, which makes it slightly easier when there are changes or you want updates. You don't have to do the whole thing, you can do one of the smaller pieces. Hopefully that makes sense. And so obviously we're going to have to incorporate standards and best practices. There's a CSA standard on emergency plans that we'll make sure is factored in. Obviously we have legislative requirements that we're going to have to meet. There's a recent Auditor General for Local Government report that I think would be helpful, certainly in identifying best practices. So we're going to incorporate all that we can, but I'll talk more about that in item 7.2. Anyone have anything on the emergency management plan? Okay, I'll send it out as or link to it in the minutes, shall we? So that people can find it easily. And I think I'd like to put that as an action item for everyone.
It is.
Okay. Everyone has to read the plan, or at least look at it. Okay, 6.3 training. So we have a fair amount of training upcoming. For emergency social services, we're running an emotional and spiritual care course on May 11th and 12th. Thank you, Denise, for spearheading all the organization around that. We have about 8 people enrolled so far, so not bad for little Bowen Island. And then June 2nd, sorry, that's taught by the Salvation Army. June 2nd, EMBC has sponsored a Justice Institute course on registration and referrals. We're offering that on the island. And then we're looking at doing some communications workshops in the fall. So they're really about like social interactions rather than public communications within ESS. And then hopefully a lot of our volunteers are going to undertake training in town because there's funding available for that this year. As for EOC training, as I think I mentioned, we have grant funding for crisis communications training and rapid damage assessment training. So I'd be interested to hear sort of what dates for that might work. The crisis communications training will be more targeted at senior officials, elected officials and senior officials within the municipality. But the rapid damage assessment, I believe, will have to have a wider audience. I was hoping that Robin Fenton would be here for this discussion because she's our in-house rapid damage assessment expert. But she and I will have to sit down and talk about who might be best to fill those seats from the community. But certainly within the municipality, I'm hoping, Bob, that members of Public Works can potentially do some training, and the building and planning department as well. Do you think your guys would have much of an interest in it?
I'll ask them. All I can do.
What's that?
I said, I'll ask them.
I was through the course that you're talking about doing, and I'd recommend putting it out to as many people who would be in the field as possible.
Okay.
Yep. Con, are you coming to the May 11th and 12th meeting of the emotional and spiritual care?
I wasn't aware of it.
You're welcome to come.
Okay.
It'd be great if you could make it.
What is it?
I can send you the details of that.
Please do,
Or
thank
it's
you.
actually on the website too. There
Okay.
should be a poster on the website about it.
Okay,
Sure.
sure,
We can link to it in the minutes, and I can email Con about that.
thanks.
And then, as I keep hammering away, we have funds available this year to send staff to any emergency management training in the city that they'd like to attend. So we have an EOC team meeting next week, and I'll reiterate that at that point, as well as at the managers meeting. But just so this group knows, this is the year for training, and hopefully we can get all our ducks in a row and start exercising soon.
And it doesn't have to be in town, it can be online. This course is online.
Yeah, there are online courses.
Does that include the leadership one?
There,
EOC
yeah.
leadership?
Public safety lifeline leadership?
No, wait, the one for EOC director, basically.
I didn't know there was one.
Oh.
But any EMBC-sponsored JIBC course is included. So I'll send out the list of those to...
We also did a course, just a facilitated course for communications, Bruce's team, for introduction to emergency social services, so that they have a background of what social services is all about on the island and how they are a part of it. So we did one workshop, we're going to do the second workshop in another 3 weeks. And we also grabbed another person that may volunteer with emergency social services, just not a communications person, just another person, so that's good.
Okay, so I'll keep you all posted as that unfolds and we get dates hammered out and target audiences. I'll ask you to help spread the word. Oh, Steph, this is what I need you to display. So 7.1, the Community Emergency Program Review Tool. So really quickly, I wanted to show you the tool that was used at the executive committee level to start to set the strategic direction for the emergency program. Can I ask you to pass that to Sophie? So sorry, bear with me while I pull up a copy on my computer. I'll share it. I'm not possible. Is that what's called? What? Program review.
Here's the comment.
Oh.
Never give it matches to a llama.
They never give matches to a
It's,
llama.
And if there's a
EMBC
straight plate,
but
it
it
will
won't
be
be done.
little comic relief.
Pardon me.
The comments?
Well, just the one about never giving matches to a llama.
Yeah.
Even if a straight plate's in view.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's in this one.
Yeah.
Oh, and
That was the person who incorporated llamas into every response to survey.
So it wasn't just us.
Every response had a
You
llama.
want to go for Tanny's? No. I mean, I can. So this is a clunky little online tool provided to us by Emergency Management BC, but it was helpful in sort of determining what we have, what we don't have, what direction we should be headed in terms of emergency management. So you can see just from that front page that I handed out, blue is the actual, or sorry, your possible score, and then the actual is indicated by the smaller bar beside it. So in some areas we're absolutely doing better than others. So you've now received the list of questions, and that includes how they answered them. So if you go through the handout, you could do it yourself online if you feel so inclined, see how your answers compare to what the Emergency Program Executive Committee thought. This was also, it's a snapshot in time, so this was how we felt in June of last year. I like to think that when we do this again this June, we'll be able to do better in some of these areas. But this committee should be familiar with the tool and with the list of pieces. And I believe I brought it up at the last meeting and it ended up on the action item list because nobody knew what I was talking about. Sorry about that. So the handout that you're looking at, the results of the EPIC review, is available on the website. It's on the Emergency Program Committee page as an attachment. And then the CEPR review tool is available through the EMBC website, as you can see. So you're more than welcome to go ahead and play around with it online, or simply take a look at where we were in June 2017. My assumption is that this will be done annually for now until we come up with a better way of doing this. So it's a good way of tracking the progress of the program over time for now. Does anyone have any questions about that one? See at the bottom there's the button. If you'd like to send it to EMBC. I don't know if we sent it or not. I don't think so. All right. If nobody has anything to say, I don't think it's a tool that we'll actually use at the management committee level, but I felt like you should know that it is being used, and these are some of the areas that we could certainly improve in future. Any comments on that? Okay. Oh, we're doing great for time. So another thing I wanted to draw the committee's attention to was the recent Auditor General for Local Government, or of Local Government report. So there are two links here. I'm not super concerned with the audit booklet. The target audience for the audit booklet that's linked in your agendas is local government council members. So there were some interesting bits on drinking water in that. I don't know if you heard about this, Bob, or saw it, but they also did audits on drinking water systems, which I didn't read, but may or may not prove useful. So the AGLG Sydney audit, they audited the town of Sydney on Vancouver Island, looking specifically at emergency management in local government. So there were lots of interesting takeaways from this for me. I read it. It was interesting. The emergency management plan section will certainly reference when we update our plan to make sure that recommendations that were made to Sydney that were applicable across the province are incorporated here, so that we can learn from this audit. But there's lots of little tidbits in here if anyone wants a little light reading of an evening. I would recommend it. One of the big takeaways for me was the focus on business continuity planning and how that is part of emergency management according to the AGLG. And I think that the expectation from what I'm hearing at the executive committee level is that that'll be something that we take on moving forward at the municipal level. So,
Business continuity for
for the municipality, so it refers to the planning that would take place for business interruptions. So it could be that pertussis takes out half of our staff, which is not so far off. So a whooping cough outbreak means that 50% of your staff can't come to work anymore. Well, which departments would we shut down or take people from? What are our critical services that we can't even go a day without providing? Where can we second staff from? And then there's IT components, for example. What do you do if your phone goes down for, how long is it acceptable to be down? All these questions, getting these things hammered out. So that's not an overview of business continuity planning. I'm just giving examples of some of the questions that it tries to address. But we don't have a business continuity plan for the municipality.
So it's just specifically for the municipality that you're talking about? Okay.
Although we want, of course, to encourage businesses to engage in business continuity planning as well, especially some of our more critical suppliers on Bowen, like the gas station and the general store. I think it's important for the community that they're as prepared as possible for interruptions. But it's hard to my mind, it's difficult to encourage others to do something that we haven't done ourselves. So I think we should start by getting our own house in order. And this Auditor General for Local Government report seems to really heavily weigh business continuity planning. It takes up about half of the report, which I was surprised at. So they had a lot of recommendations for Sydney, and Sydney did have a business continuity plan. So I'm sure that we could improve this area. Did anyone get a chance to read the executive summary or take a look at this report at all?
Yes.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, I would recommend that everyone even just read the pages like 6 to 12. The 6 pages of executive summary are probably worth a gander.
I was initially quite alarmed to discover that there is a auditor for local government.
I felt the same
Because I did not know its existence before we got this report.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly think if an auditor came today to audit the emergency program, we'd be in much better shape than we were 2 years ago. So we've made huge progress and leaps and bounds, but it's a good indicator of where we could head, how much more we could be doing. But yeah, I felt the same way. So if anyone gets a chance to look at it and finds that some of the issues are particularly salient, or there's points that they really think should be brought back to this committee, feel free to let me know. We'll put it on another agenda in the future for discussion, particularly around the emergency plan. That's sort of the part of the audit that I'll be focusing on in the next few months as we go through that update process. Okay. Excellent. We're running an hour ahead of time. Not much discussion today. It's okay, I won't take it personally. We've been through the information items, so we should talk really briefly about our next meeting unless anyone has anything else to add before we move forward. June. So it's come to my attention, so June, I think that we should meet as per the monthly schedule, as we have planned. But July I won't be in town. I know it's pretty skeleton staff around here usually in the summer anyway. And then August, apparently none of the committees meet.
Well, they can.
Yeah, we can. So I think my thinking is sort of in June that we should bite off large chunks of the emergency management plan and then spend the summer working on that rather than having meetings. But I'm curious to sort of get an idea of how the group feels. I, as you know, don't like meetings simply for the sake of meeting, so I'm happy to cancel July and August, given that there usually don't tend to be a lot of people around. What does everyone think?
When you're referring to large chunk, exactly what was that? What's the scope of that deliverable?
Yeah, that's still to be determined. What I'm thinking is that in June, we'll assign sections and then have deliverables for the September or October meeting. So nobody will be here in June. All right, so hearing no objections, I think we'll just go ahead and cancel July and August so that people can plan accordingly. Everyone okay with that? But we will still meet next month in June, as scheduled. The primary topic of discussion is going to be the emergency management plan. Anyone have anything to add before we adjourn? You guys are really quiet today. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I brought this for you.
Hello, how are you?
Okay. That's mine.
That's good.